Greetings, Mavericks and new viewers. Tonight, direct and live from the Maverick News Network World Studios. This is Maverick News with Rick Walker.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back, Mavericks and new viewers. Great to have you here. We have a special broadcast tonight, obviously, because we have this conflict in the Middle East escalating, but we're not going to focus just on that tonight. We have Mike Pekarik here, our Ukraine specialist and veteran, who will shed new light and perspective on both of the areas of conflict because they intersect, interact, they affect each other, and there's no question it is already having an impact here in Canada and the United States. Obviously, as we see the State Department issuing a warning to everyone to, under no circumstances, travel to Iran tonight, and issuing travel advisories for other places around the globe. And a lot of talk about the U.S. potentially entering the conflict in a direct way in the Middle East. But what of Ukraine? Well, we saw new developments at the G7 today, where Canada stepped up and announced new support for Ukraine moving ahead. So everything is still evolving on both fronts. And Mike Pekarik will join us on the other side to help us make sense of it all. Stay with us.
Greetings, brave Mavericks. Our quest for truth continues. We go beyond fake news. Together we expose propaganda. Together we pull others out of rabbit holes. We are maverick thinkers. We are all unique individuals, defenders of individual rights and freedoms, credible, trusted, grounded in reality. Maverick News, defending free speech, Donate at freedomreporters.com. Do it now. Tomorrow may be too late. Maverick News. The world is watching.
Okay, as the world spirals into more craziness, it's time to bring Mike Pekarik in so that he can help us understand what is going on. Welcome back, sir.
Good evening, Rick. Good evening, everyone listening.
Thank you so much for joining us again tonight. We need you because a lot of this is pretty crazy, and everything is unfolding so quickly, especially in the last 24 hours in the Middle East, but also in Ukraine, which I think, with everything going on in the Middle East, there's a danger here of having the focus shift away from what is going on in Europe. And, both conflicts are going to have long-lasting impact here at home as well. So just give me your overall aerial view of what you think is going on right now.
Well, yeah, I'm glad for the aerial because I had all sorts of the details in my head that I was running through. It's important. What you said is it's important to understand how those of us over here, we've got an ocean separating us from Europe and an ocean separating us from Asia. And we have our own worries. We have our own day-to-day lives. There's no rocket or artillery or drone incoming. We're not wondering if we're going to have to go to the air raid shelter in the middle of the night. So we have the separation, both physically and in lived experience, that this has been a problem for Ukraine since the start, because it had the front headlines for a while, but it's not that it's let up. It's not that the war crimes have changed. They're ongoing. It's not that the existential threat from Russia has gone away, but life in the rest of the world, we get distracted quite a bit. And it's not even that the distractions aren't worth our time, but it's important to understand and hold multiple things going in your head. So overall, I didn't expect Israel to go hard against Iran. I can't really fault them for it. I'm still a little bit unclear on how I think about what's going on now. However, Iran in the past couple of years has been helping Russia to commit war crimes inside of Ukraine. And so Israel going hard after Iran will benefit Ukraine in that way. Israel has gone after, like you said, the drone. Specifically, Israel destroyed their main Shahed drone factory and a parts factory, where there was some debate until fairly recently about how Russia was constructing Shaheds inside of Russia, which they do have a plant for that. Well, we can talk about that later. But disrupting, it turns out that Russia was not building all of the parts. So disrupting their supply of parts will directly impact how many Shahed drones Russia has available to launch against Ukraine. So overall, it's it's a really tense situation globally.
Yeah, and we're seeing the battle lines become clearer here, and the alliances between various countries become clearer, because you're seeing North Korea, Iran, Russia for sure lining up together, and that's going to have a direct impact on Ukraine, because as you pointed out, if Israel is attacking the drone factories in Iran, then those are not going to be sent to Ukraine. In addition, missiles that Iran has been supplying to Russia, other weapons,
including the ballistic missiles, the really fast ones,
won't be available to Russia to use against Ukraine, because they'll need them in Iran. So this spreads things out more thinly.
Well, and Iran's already shot off a lot of them. And so obviously if you shoot one off, you can't send it to Russia. I've seen the impacts in Haifa and Tel Aviv and other places in Israel, but Israel's very sophisticated, very capable air defenses are getting most of them. And so they're being, chewed up. They're launched, but they're not really doing anything other than, making Israel shoot off one of their interceptor missiles. It's more complicated than that. It's a layered defense, but this is versus Ukraine, where we basically had to build an air defense system up mostly from scratch. They had some really antiquated systems pre-war that they used smartly, but they were antiquated and they were not up to the job. And so the difference between launching missiles against Israel versus launching them against Ukraine, even still, Ukraine's air defenses are significantly better now, but it's nothing compared to Israel. Israel also has a very much smaller area to defend. So it's a lot easier to set up an air defense system when you're just talking about a tiny bit of land than you are for a much, much larger nation.
And the other effect of this conflict in the Middle East is that we're seeing oil prices rise. How will that impact Russia?
Not as much as they aren't rising as much as I expected. I expected a hard kinetic war in Iran to just really spike the oil. I haven't looked today, but yesterday they were still hovering in the $75 region. I expected them to be well over $100. This is also one of those things where it's a little bit more complicated than just the oil prices, because one of the main routes for Russian petroleum to be exported and sold, specifically to India, was through the Caspian Sea, through Iran, through the Persian Gulf, and over to India. If there's a shooting war in Iran, it's a lot more difficult to try and ship petroleum through there. So
Yes.
there's a little bit of a wash going on.
Yeah. So as you can see, folks, all of this stuff is connected. It's there's just no escaping that. Fair?
Fair. And for me as a hard Ukrainian advocate, that there's a little bit of enemy of my enemy. Israel's history of helping out Ukraine has been relatively minimal so far. There's some unknowns there. There's been some rumors that Israel helps modernize the F-16s that are now flying for Ukraine. But in terms of missiles and other sorts of ammunition, Israel's kept a lot of those to themselves for their own reasons. I'm not necessarily faulting them for that, but as opposed to a lot of other nations that have given Ukraine quite a bit, Israel has been pretty stingy. But since we're talking about, hey, Israel just used their F-35 fleet to destroy the Shahed factory and the parts factory, that's a kind of a big deal to Ukraine. That's a big help. It also continues the narrative that Russian weapons are just trash. That I don't know how many people know the Israeli Air Force, because that's doing most of the talking right now. They have 280 jets-ish, give or take 20. You never know what's down and how accurate those numbers are that you read. But they only have 45 to 50 F-35s. Everything else is definitely not a stealthy jet. So they use their stealth to go in and completely, and the Mossad had some special agents that took some things out from the ground, but they completely dismantled Iran's defense network. Their aerial defenses were just completely taken apart. And it took a little bit longer in the capital city of Tehran. They only announced air superiority over Tehran in the last 24 hours. But this is how a modern nation with sophisticated weaponry that they are well trained on, and that the people using the weaponry have the authority to do what they're trained to do. And they don't even have that many. Their air force is relatively small. And they completely took out Iran's entire defense network in 72 hours? How long has this been going? It did not take long at all. And the Air Force is my military service, and we discuss how the air war is going. You can have air parity, where nobody really owns the sky. It's a contested air environment. You can have air dominance, where you mostly control the air. Air superiority is where you mostly control the air. And then you have air dominance, where you own the sky, that your enemy can do absolutely nothing. You can fly wherever you want, whenever you want, do whatever you want from the air. And Israel, with fewer than 300 jets and only 45 to 50 of those being stealth jets, has achieved air dominance over the entire nation of Iran in just a matter of days. So this Iran was using Russian weapon systems. Some of them were older, but they were still Russian weapon systems. They had gotten a few new ones in payment for their drones and all that. It's just another example of Russian weapons are trash.
So I've seen videos claiming that at first 2 F-35s were shot down by Iran, then 1 F-35 was shot down by Iran and a pilot captured, but it looks like that might be propaganda. I can't tell. What's your assessment?
From what I can tell so far, it's propaganda. The way that Israel did it was smart. They had Mossad agents in country for months. In some ways, this was similar to Ukraine's attack on the Russian bomber bases, except they actually had more people on the ground, more highly trained special forces people. And they had emplaced various remotely operated weapon systems that when the balloon went up, as we say in the military, when the balloon went up, they unleashed all of these rockets that took out radars here, there, and everywhere. And without radars, I don't care what your missiles are like, you're not going to be able to shoot down the jet. Now, anything that flies can be shot down. So there is a small chance Iran could shoot down an F-35, but I haven't seen any evidence for it. The pictures I've seen have all been AI generated, obviously so. One of the early ones, the jet engine was still lit. And you're like, who made this? And so it's, for me, proof or it didn't happen. So if they had a pilot, you'd think they'd be bragging about that a lot more. They'd be showing the pilot. I don't see it.
Yeah. So obviously, support for Ukraine is the key concern. And that's why Zelensky went to the G7 summit here in Canada, in Alberta. And today, after Donald Trump left abruptly, I guess because of this situation in the Middle East, he left yesterday early, a day early. But today we see Mark Carney, the new Prime Minister of Canada, announcing a new aid package for Ukraine, $4.3 billion. Half of that is straight up contribution in both, I guess, money and material, like armored vehicles and ammunition, etc. And then the other half is a loan. The interest will be covered from the interest accumulating on frozen Russian assets. Here's what Carney and Zelensky said today in Alberta.
I would like to start by condemning, in the strongest terms, the latest outrage, barbarism from Russia, and express my deep condolences, and those of the Canadian people, to the families in Kyiv who were affected. This underscores the importance of standing in total solidarity with Ukraine, with the Ukrainian people, and we had a discussion last night amongst G7 leaders. The President and I will discuss more, and then of course we'll have the direct discussion in a moment together. But we underscored the importance of using maximum pressure against Russia, who has refused to come to the table. The President has led unconditionally to come to the table in search of peace. And maximum pressure includes financial pressure, and Canada is announcing today several measures, sanctions, first and foremost, against a number of individuals in Russia, against over 40 entities in Russia and beyond that are trying to contribute to the evasion of sanctions, the sanctioning of over 200 vessels in the shadow fleet that Russia is using, again, to try to evade these sanctions. That's the first thing. The second is we are providing additional military assistance, drones, helicopters, broader munitions, over $2 billion worth of assistance directly to Ukraine. And thirdly, we are dispersing the next tranche of the loan based on the frozen Russian assets, over $2 billion as well. This is our contribution. We'll be working with our European and other allies for their contributions to provide the support. And to be absolutely clear, the support will be unwavering until we get a just peace for Ukraine and Ukrainian people.
Thanks so much, dear Prime Minister. First of all, good to be here in Canada, and for the G7 summit, thank you for your invitation. But first of all, thank you for your very important words, warm words, and supporting Ukraine. Of course, condolences to our families. Really, our families had very difficult night. One of the biggest attack from the very beginning of this war, 440 Shaheeds, Iranian drones, and 32 missiles, including ballistic, and I was on direct connection during the flight with all the ministers and of course with the chief of air defense, and really it was a big attack on civilian infrastructure, on people, just people, houses, and etc. And for now, information is not total information, not that final information, but for now we have 138 injured people and 12 killed. And so, yes, it's a big tragedy for us, and we need support from our allies. And I'm here, and thank you for the military package. It's important for our soldiers to be strong at the battlefield, to stay strong out until Russia will be ready for the peace negotiations. We are ready for the peace negotiations, unconditional ceasefire. I think it's very important, but for this we need pressure. And of course I want to speak with Prime Minister today about sanctions, additional sanctions, and thanks for the real unwavering support from your side, from all the Canadians to our people. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
And we have some images.
Yeah, this is the video that I sent. This was an apartment. I believe it was in Kyiv, but there were several apartment blocks that were hit the last couple of days.
Yeah, some of that we can't show because it's too graphic.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the video I sent you can't show.
Yeah, bodies shown as civilians just laying at the foot of the building. And we have this.
And make no mistake, this is a war crime. You can look at what Ukraine's doing in their attacks, which are targeted and precise, versus this, that there was just nothing near. They went after civilians. There was no other. There's no
these are apartment buildings.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and you have this video, yes.
It's just an apartment building.
And those of us that remember 9/11, I mean, we hunted them down until we found them in 9/11, and we used the full weight to the United States to go find them. For something like this, for flying something into a building where civilians were.
So
and this is a nightly occurrence in Ukraine.
Yeah, and they've increased the intensity of the attacks the Russians have against Ukraine in recent weeks. How extensive has it been? How much damage are they doing?
This is some of the hardest in the entire war. I'd have to look to see if it is actually the hardest. It's a sustained campaign. Some of this still dates back to Russia wanting to get back with their bombers. But there is light at the end of the tunnel for Ukraine. They haven't been sitting idly by. We talked about Israel taking out Shahed factories in Iran, but the Ukrainians have used their longer range drones that they've developed. These are entirely domestic Ukrainian weapon systems, but they took out the Russian Shahed factory. They took out Russian battery factory that was used. Those batteries were used on the drones. They took out fiber optic cable, which, if anyone's paying attention, drone warfare, fiber optics are now key. So it's just this across the board thing. The ballistic missile factories going up. Some of those in Iran that Israel took out. Some of them in Russia. Ukraine continues to go after munitions factories, petroleum, bridges, railroads, ammunition dumps. There's a different tracker that shows that Russia's use of tanks and armored fighting vehicles in frontline combat has gone almost to zero, where Russia is relying more on motorcycles and golf carts or ATVs. or other civilian vehicles, because they just don't have anymore. There's been people that track the Russian storage facilities, and you can get a decent satellite picture. You can start counting what's there, and you can, if you know what you're looking at, you can even tell the difference between different types of tanks. Like that's T-55, that's T-72. And they've been counting them, and Russia is down something like 40% of what they were pre-war, but that 40%, you're talking stuff that's been out in the Russian summers and winters with no cover, no maintenance for 40, 50, even 60 years. So good luck getting that into a fighting machine. Mostly it's rusting metal. So Russia's almost out. So we talk about the bombardment of Ukraine and the war crimes, and that's important, but sometimes we can focus on that and forget what Ukraine is able to succeed in. Ukraine's been hit hard, but Ukraine's fighting back. Their spirit's still there. Their innovation's still there.
And in fact, Trump, when him and J.D. Vance attacked Zelensky and at the White House, saying he hasn't had no cards.
He had two cards.
Playing card.
Did we cover this last time I was on? I can't remember.
I think we've talked about it a bit, but
since then, when Zelensky was in the White House and was told he had no cards, both the bomber thing was almost done. That plan had been in planning and preparation and operational movement stage for at least 12 months at that point. It was almost ready to go. And that was not the only plan. So it's just like when Zelensky was told he had no cards, he's like, what are you talking about? I've been doing this for 3 years. I've got cards. We're working on more cards.
Yeah. And it looks like the tactic of smuggling drones into Russia is a blueprint that Israel was following as well on this attack.
Special Forces operations, we've been working with Special Forces. I only know a couple of their Special Forces people personally, but they're in Ukraine, I'm talking about. They're capable. You talk about a nation of 40 million. When you're talking about Special Forces, you're talking about several hundred. But in a nation of 40 million, you can find several hundred really capable, highly trained people. So the same is true with Israel. America has elite special forces that it's their job to go infiltrate and do things like this, raise a ruckus, cause some mayhem. Ukraine has some highly capable people.
Yeah, the other thing that I found interesting was with this attack by Israel on Iran, it has resulted in something of a fracture, a division within Trump's base of support, and even within his administration, because on Air Force One, Trump was asked about Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah, I was just reading about this before the show, actually.
Yeah, and I have the clip here. So he asked about Tulsi Gabbard saying back in March that Iran was not close, wasn't working on a nuclear weapon. And this was Trump's response to the question.
Mr. President, you've always said that you don't believe Iran should be able to have a nuclear weapon. But how close do you personally think that they were to getting one? Because Tulsi Gabbard testified in March that the intelligence community said Iran wasn't building a nuclear weapon.
I don't care what she said. I think they were very close to having it.
He doesn't care what she said.
The funny thing is that I am happy when anybody says something like that about Tulsi Gabbard, because I think she's an awful human being. But it's a little bit more complicated than that. To a certain extent, that journalist was not as completely informed. The question was not phrased as nuanced as the reality would show. That Tulsi Gabbard, and this we're talking about like February, March, so this was not all that recent. I mean, it's still this year, but it's already June. So she was talking about what the Biden administration knew, that Iran had been working on enriching their uranium. I can't remember if they were working on plutonium as well, but there's a certain enrichment status that a civilian power reactor can use, or a medical research reactor, whatever you're doing. But the reactor grade refinement is much lower than what you would need to make a viable weapon. And Iran had very much been enriching well past any civilian use. And this was known in December of 24, early January 25, before Trump took over and Tulsi Gabbard was being read in. So the other part of that is, when you're talking about a weapon, you're talking about, so enriching uranium is one thing, you need that. And Tulsi Gabbard told Congress that, yes, they were doing that. But then there's the other side where you actually have to build a weapon that works. So you've got, if you're talking about a fission bomb, one of the ways you can do it is the implosion with the shaped charges, where you're making a non-critical mass, or it's separated a little bit and you're shrinking it with explosives so it goes critical, or the gun type where you're shooting one into another. They sound simple in practice, and they're actually kind of complicated. So how far along Iran was with actually getting a weapon is open to debate even still. Israel had some information that was kind of sort of vetted about an underground facility that might or might not have been weapons research. Israel actually doesn't have the weaponry to take that out, if you wanted to transition to any of that. But so, yeah, there was some debate. There was some nuance in what even Tulsi Gabbard said and what the American intelligence community can state as a matter of fact or speculation. You know, the difference between fact and speculation. Here's what we know. Here's what might be going on. But so, yeah, I'm not a big fan of that reporter's question. But it is nice to hear Trump say he doesn't care what Tulsi Gabbard says.
Yeah, and it seems like that isn't. It seems like the divisions cut much deeper than just between Trump and Tulsi Gabbard.
They do.
He's criticized Tucker Carlson in the past 24 hours, calling him kooky,
and told him to get a network.
Yeah, saying Iran is not allowed to have a nuclear weapon. I'm seeing division within the MAGA movement, as half want to support Iran, half want to support Israel. And I think this is likely to have some sort of an impact on what's going on in Ukraine. And I'm just going to run this from yesterday.
Well, before you do that, I think where you're getting at is one of the bigger fractures is Trump in 2024 ran on a much more isolationist platform.
Right.
And when you're in the United States, when you're talking about isolationism, you're talking about the 1930s, like no foreign wars. If Europe gets into a mess, let them deal with it. You're talking appeasement. You're talking about not our problem. It's not in my backyard. I don't care. So there's a significant portion of MAGA Trump voters, like his rabid core, that wanted Trump to not have any foreign wars. Mm-hmm. They wanted him to end everything. His thing about promising peace in Ukraine, they wanted that. They certainly didn't want a hot war against Iran, because these are the people saying, didn't we just get out of Afghanistan? And we're still kind of in Iraq, but not really, not kinetically with combat. We are still fighting in Syria. We're fighting ISIS. So all of this MAGA base was, no wars. And so this thing with Iran, that's got a lot of Trump supporters really angry.
And as various nations line up, and these battle lines are being drawn, and you're seeing now this division within the MAGA movement, it just makes me wonder if Trump is not being slapped upside the head with a dose of reality that is inescapable at this point for him.
He's famous for not either not showing up to his daily intelligence briefings or not reading the material in his first administration. the military and intelligence people, for like a normal president that reads, that has reading comprehension and an attention span. So like Biden, Obama, Bush, 43, Clinton, they had decades of very detailed daily reports. Like this is what's going on, city names, very details on like supply chains and the technology, the technology streams, very detailed. 100 pages of dense stuff. And somebody like, Bush wouldn't necessarily read it, but he would at least pay attention. But like Obama and Clinton were known to very much absorb those kinds of things. Like they just inhale that kind of stuff. Trump needed 2 pages and it needed to have pictures. And if it had anything more than that in his first term, he just didn't pay attention. So it's not that them putting the report together wasn't necessarily valuable to anyone else, but he wouldn't read it. They wouldn't be able to get the information to the president of the United States. So yeah, he might be getting a kind of a dose of reality here, because he didn't do the reading. He doesn't pay attention. He's got his own thoughts of how things should be, but then there's how things really are.
And this is from yesterday, which drives this point home. So Trump goes to the G7 in Alberta, Canada, with Trudeau on the brink. Trudeau's not prime minister anymore. Now it's Mark Carney, but he's still thinking about Trudeau. Trudeau is living rent-free in Trump's head, and there's a big problem with what he's about to say.
Yeah.
The G7 used to be the G8. Barack Obama and a person named Trudeau didn't want to have Russia in. And I would say that was a mistake, because I think you wouldn't have a war right now if you had Russia in. And you wouldn't have a war right now if Trump were president 4 years ago. But it didn't work out that way. But it used to be the G8, and now it's, I guess, what's that, 8 years ago, it switched over. They threw Russia out, which I claimed was a very big mistake. Even though I wasn't in politics then, I was very loud about it. It was a mistake in that you spend so much time talking about Russia, and he's no longer at the table. So it makes life more complicated. But you wouldn't.
Well, the thing is, folks, Trudeau wasn't prime minister when Putin was kicked out of the G8. Stephen Harper.
When the other world leaders hear Trump,
and the reason Russia was kicked out was because that is when Russia invaded Ukraine for the first time. They annexed Crimea, and it was decided they had to leave. They didn't have a place at the table anymore because of their aggressive actions back at that time. And it wasn't Trudeau who was in power. It was Stephen Harper, who was Canadian Prime Minister at that time. Trump is suffering from TDS, Trudeau derangement syndrome.
It's a big part of the MAGA base too, where he just, like Obama, if it's Obama, it was bad. And there is like this big conspiracy theory about Obama was really in charge when Biden was president. And I'm like, it's like you realize that in a group with 8 nations, the 8 largest in the world, you got Japan, you got Canada, you got France, you got UK, you got Germany. It wasn't just Obama and was it Harper? It was, the other 6. Yeah. So it's just, it is absurd. Just the notion that, yes, Obama was president of the United States, but Germany, United Kingdom, France, Japan. So,
well, I'm worried. I'm very worried.
Well, when Trump says something that's just that profoundly uninformed would be a kind way of putting it. Willfully ignorant would be more of an academic, very unkind way of putting it. But he's just dumb. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And when the president of the United States says something like that on an international stage, it's just, people are like, what's going on?
And people are understandably afraid of him. Like, when I say people, I mean other world leaders, because he's the leader of the most powerful nation on earth, and he's kind of dumb. And I see, anti-liberal, anti-Carney live streamers criticizing Carney for being nice to Trump after going through the election and using the 51st state threat as sort of an election issue. But no, man, like, what do you want? What do you want him to do? Like, sit there and say, "Hey, Trump, you jerk, get out of my country." No, you're not going to talk like that to him. But there is this element of concern, fear, even. It's not healthy what I see going on.
Hasn't Carney been relatively forceful? Like, yeah, we're never going to be a 51st
Absolutely.
state.
Yes.
And there was another moment in the G7, which I don't know if you have that video, but it was a Carney Trump press conference where the press started asking Trump questions and he just started, he can't hold a thought. You mentioned that 2 pages with pictures. He has problems holding a complex thought in his head. And we all have a little bit of a brain meltdown but Trump just can't do it. And so it's like the stream of consciousness, like the sentence structure it's completely whacked. And Carney is sitting there and he's going, what is going on? Eventually he steps in, he's like, I'm gonna pull my host privileges here. We're gonna stop this. And so he completely cut off Trump, which was not a kind thing to do. And it was aggressive and assertive. And it was Carney doing what he's supposed to do. I applauded him.
Yeah, I thought that he did his job as the host, honestly, but in a way, he sort of saved Trump because
from himself.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And here he is actually today, since we've got on the subject, here he is talking again about Canada.
I don't care what she said. I think they were very close to having one.
I got what's going on. You were at this beautiful scene for the meeting, and you said a lot about acquiring Canada as a state. What did anybody talk to you about that? And where are you now?
Much better deal from Canada, but it's up to them. They're going to have to pay a lot of tariffs and things. They're going to have to pay a lot of money for the dome, for the Iron Dome. They want to be a part of it. We may make a separate deal on that, by the way. We discussed that, for the dome. That may be a separate deal. They want to be at $71 billion. They're going to pay.
There could be a dome thing separate from the tariff.
They'll be in the dome. Yeah, they'll be under the dome.
Are you open to
$71 billion to be under the dome?
Yeah, trying to do an Israeli-style air defense network over the entire United States is ambitious, would be a kind word. I mean, is it technically feasible? Yeah. If you throw enough money at it, you can pretty much do whatever you want. But, man... I don't know how that would work. I kind of do. You would have to have like the distributed network and all that kind of stuff. But man, that's complicated. There's a lot of just basic structure. You're talking buildings that will require water supply, heat, sewer, living accommodations, and they're going to have to be all sorts of places because radar coverage is a thing. So you're either in some of the more remote places, you're going to have either airborne, constant airborne radars, or you're going to have a facility on the ground. Any of that's expensive. And a lot of that, when you're talking about facilities that don't exist, airplanes that don't exist, what is that, 10 years away before you get anything remotely competent as a defense network?
Massive.
Yeah, you can do it, but I think 71 billion is a gross underestimate. I would think it would be $1 trillion or more.
Man, and it just seems to me like the technology still needs to evolve, because I think you need to use lasers.
So we have some of that. We have some laser defense turrets. Even Ukraine has been fielding some test articles, but we've installed them on some of our Burke destroyers. And we're even a little bit behind the scenes. Israel's got a couple that are better than ours. They're a little bit more motivated to develop them. China might or might not have some that are okay. It's a little hard to know what China actually has. They're more secretive than we are. So we're progressing that way. Developing even the technology stream to build, because a laser inside of the atmosphere is going to have a limited range because, dispersion inside the air. There's going to be a limit to how far it's going to be able to shoot anything down. And so that's at best a close-in weapon system that would be the weapon of last resort. And if you're going to do CIWS, that's CIWS, close-in weapon system. If you're going to do CIWS with laser turrets or the old Gatling guns that we had on the Phalanx systems, just massive numbers of those. So, I mean, could you imagine something, a CIWS system that can only reach out to a kilometer, that's only lethal out to about a kilometer, and you're talking about a city the size of Los Angeles? How many of those you're just going to need for Los Angeles? Forget the rest of the country. Los Angeles, New York, Miami, Seattle. You're talking about hundreds of systems just for those cities that I named, and we haven't even begun to cover the continent yet. So
it just seems like, because we're talking about this, it's a prelude to a future where the oceans are no longer going to be adequate insulation against global conflict.
Yeah, we've dealt with this before a little bit. This is something when we talked about should Canada get the F-35 or something else. Canada has, some people don't think about it because they look at these flat maps and they don't realize that the shortest distance between Russian bomber bases or missile bases, for that matter, and United States cities is actually over the Arctic Circle, that they would be shooting over the North Pole, over Canada, and hitting places like New York. And that's much closer than like shooting over, Germany and France and the Atlantic Ocean. So we did, in the Cold War, we had, I'd like to say Cobra Bell was one of the radar network systems, and it was integrated into the Canadian Air Force. We had NORAD and Cheyenne Mountain, which is still there. And some of those radar systems have been modernized. Those old Cobra Bell things they're long past their utility. And some, I don't even think any of them are working, but grain of salt with that statement. So we had a network, but it was set up for slow bombers, ICBM warning, which we kind of sort of had some anti-ICBM stuff, not really. Back then, we were talking Cold War. So what we had before is nothing compared to what Trump is talking about right now.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, Israel's Iron Dome might have their flag on it, but Boeing, Raytheon, Lockheed, BAE, General Dynamics, those are the people that have been heavily involved or specifically building those systems. So, and the United States paid for roughly 50% of that. That's a give or take depending on which system we're talking about. The radar, the long range missile, what system are we talking about? So has the United States been heavily involved in this kind of research going back several decades? Yes. So do we have the technology? Yes. But man, putting it on an entire continent is a lot different than putting it on Israel, which is very small.
Yes. Yeah. And, deterrence is, I guess, the most effective tool when it comes to fighting a war, so that you don't have to fight. But when I see what's been going on with Trump, talking tough, but at the same time saying he wants to be the peace president, and then even drawing lines in the sand and giving Putin a 2-week deadline, which I think has come and gone.
He keeps giving him 2-week deadlines. There have been several of those.
And nothing happens. And
he's earned the nickname Taco because of that.
Right. So where does that leave us at this point then? Because I think that the
I don't
most
know.
recent 2-week deadline came and went, and
Like a
there
week
wasn't even
ago.
a mention. Yeah,
Yeah.
nothing, not even a
Yeah.
mention.
So, and he's given deadlines to Iran. He's given deadlines to Putin. He had that big, beautiful call with Putin on Trump's birthday. That was after the deadline passed, and then Trump had very fond things to say about Putin. Just blew my mind, but it didn't necessarily surprise me. It's just still shocking to see a president doing that. That being said, Israel did do the United States a big favor in terms of giving Trump some bona fides when he does actually threaten people, because the Mossad was using their emplaced weapons that they use to take out the radars. America has those kinds of weapon systems. The Israeli Air Force is comprised entirely of American jets. Their combat jets are F-15s, F-16s, and F-35s, using not entirely, but in terms of ground attack, all or the vast majority of their weapons have been American. Precision, small diameter bombs, laser guided bombs. They're American weapon systems. So their level of precision attack, they took out an Iranian SAM system that was in between two Iranian civilian apartment buildings, and Israel was able to drop the bomb right on the missile, and the buildings were fine. So just as an example of how a competent military runs their show. So the Israel did Trump a favor, that when we're talking about, we actually do have something to back up this tough talk. We do.
Yeah. And so do you think that, sorry, go ahead.
That's all right. One thing that I noticed this weekend, that it's one of those under the radar things that people don't necessarily think about is a thing. But the United States surged more than 24 aerial tankers. These are the ones that can refuel jets midair. And people don't necessarily think about how much of a combat thing this is, because it's just, it's a gas station with wings. But what you do is a jet is fully loaded. They have enough fuel. So there's a maximum takeoff weight on any jet. So a combat jet will have ordnance and then enough fuel to get up to the tanker. And then they're going to fill up on the tanker, and then they're going to fly to wherever they're going to do. So it's a huge range extender. These tankers were followed up by a surge of jets that came out of RAF Lakenheath, has Strike Eagles and F-35s. Some came from the United States. A couple of months ago, it was reported that the United States was basing B-2 stealth bombers and B-1, the Bones, the swing wing bombers from America, possibly B-52s, in a place called Diego Garcia, which I don't know if you know what Diego Garcia is. It's an island base south of India that is United Kingdom territory, but it is a shared military base with the United States. And that's where, when we bomb things in the Middle East, that's where our bombers base out of, if they're not coming from the United States. Stealth bombers are in Diego Garcia. The only weapon that can take out that underground Iranian nuclear weapons site is something we call a MOP, a massive ordnance penetrator, that there is no depth and no thickness of reinforced concrete that thing can't punch through. The only bomber that's currently operating with that is the B-2 stealth bomber. So where those B-2 stealth bombers go, that's where the threat is. So, we've been positioning things for months for a potential war with Iran.
Yeah, well, I could see that. And then the question is, does the United States need to be involved in order to take out the nuclear program? Because we're hearing that it's deeply embedded in maybe even inside a mountain.
Well, that's what I was talking about, is if it is decided that deeply dug hole needs to be taken out, the only thing that can do it is a B-2 with a MOP.
which means direct intervention by the U.S. military.
It would be direct intervention by the U.S. military.
Well, that complicates things.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a big bomb. I don't know if people understand how big those things are.
I think that's as big as it gets, without going nuclear. In fact, I think the explosion is about on par, isn't it, with almost a nuclear weapon?
It depends on what you're talking about. The thing about massive ordnance penetrators, anything that's designed to punch through, and we're not talking about, a concrete foundation wall or cinder bricks or even tank armor. We're talking about 100 meters of steel reinforced concrete, like serious hardening. And the massive ordnance penetrator can get through that. Not all of that is explosive. There's a lot more that goes into that. So the actual boom on the MOP is actually not overly big. It's still big. So, 1,000 pounds, 2,000 pounds, but it's not huge.
The proliferation of nuclear weapons is really what is destabilizing things in many respects. Iran pursuing a nuclear weapon. And now I'm even hearing, and I'm not hearing this so much from like Zelensky, but I've heard media types talking about Ukraine looking at possibly wanting to reacquire nuclear weapons because Trump is saying no to NATO.
Yeah. So they're looking for a real deterrence, and this is what's been fueling people for a while. It's why North Korea developed it. What the big watershed moment was when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait back in 1990, and the United States and a big coalition just completely took him apart. He didn't have nuclear weapons, and so that was one of the reasons why he was making noises. He never had nuclear weapons, but he started talking a tough game. But it's why North Korea developed a nuke, because if you're going to go after a nation and completely take them apart, they're going to have a weapon of last resort. So are we going to think twice about going after North Korea now that we know they have nukes? Yeah, we are. So it's having a nuke is a real thing. The company of nations, the United Kingdom, actually, their nuclear weapons are a little bit more complicated. There's a lot of muck tied into the United States with their nuclear weapons. So, for instance, their submarines that carry nuclear missiles, they carry an American weapon, the Trident missile. France has an independent nuclear weapons program, but the United Kingdom does not. They rely on the United States. So yeah, it gets complicated. And when Obama did the nuclear weapons treaty with Iran, whenever that was, but then Trump withdrew from it, I think it's been kind of a foregone conclusion since then that Iran would push for a nuclear weapon or somebody would have to take them out. Because why on earth would they trust the United States again? Trump was talking about we need to negotiate again, and Iran's like, so.
Yeah, well, that seems to be his pattern, right?
But he withdrew from the last treaty, and the last treaty that Obama struck was proof to the moderates inside of Iran that the United States could be a trustworthy negotiating partner. And so it gave significant political boost to the moderates inside of Iran at the great expense of the hardliners, the nationalists, and the theocrats like the Ayatollah. And when Trump withdrew, all of a sudden the Ayatollah gained all sorts of power. The moderates looked foolish, like, no, the United States can't be trusted. So some of this is Trump's failure in his first term.
Yeah, well, for the peace president, he sure has a whole lot of war going on around him. It's not working out quite the way he promised.
He didn't stop the war in Ukraine between 2017 and 2021. He had 4 years to do it.
Yeah, and it's exactly right. And then when he stands there and gets all his information wrong at the G7, just his ignorance on display. Full display, and he's saying you wouldn't have had the war. Well, actually, you already had the war.
You did. Mhm.
Yeah. So that confuses people, and the difference between Ukraine and Iran when it comes to the proliferation of nuclear weapons is Iran is pursuing a nuclear weapon for the first time, but Ukraine actually gave up its nuclear weapons after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the fall of the Soviet Union.
There were
And
several nations that inherited some of the old Soviet nukes, and Ukraine was one of them.
Yeah.
Ironically, they also inherited a whole bunch of the Russian bombers, and they gave some of those bombers back to Russia, and now Russia is using them to launch cruise missiles against Ukraine.
Yeah, and I think Bill Clinton just came out with a statement saying, I think he apologized, saying
Possibly.
that, yeah, I think he did, and said that he was sorry that it was a mistake for him to have supported the idea of Ukraine giving up the nuclear weapons, because of course they lost their deterrent ultimately, and even because Russia violated the Budapest Memorandum.
It went a little bit out of favor, the idea that it takes a big man to admit their own mistakes, but good on him for doing that. But there was a lot of hope in the 90s. You and I both remember the 90s, that Cold War was over. The Soviets were gone. Boris Yeltsin was a drunk, but he at least wanted to make peace and maybe a better life. It didn't turn out that way, but there was a lot of hope in the 90s.
Yeah. So sanctions, new ones being announced by Canada, and I guess efforts to kind of shadow the shadow fleet in order to put pressure on Russia and their sale of oil around the world.
Yeah, different nations, especially those in the Baltic Sea, the Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Poland. They've been more active in some cases actually confiscating shadow fleet, but also sanctions and stuff like that. That's a big deal. That Canada actually going after it. Somebody needs to start breaking the ice a little bit more on the shadow fleet, as well as on the frozen Russian assets. So the Ukrainian doing both of those, that's a big positive.
Yeah. So let's take a little break here, and we'll reconvene on the other side of this, folks. Stay with us.
Maverick News. The world is watching. Greetings, brave Mavericks. Our quest for truth continues. We go beyond fake news. Together we expose propaganda. Together we pull others out of rabbit holes. We are maverick thinkers. We are all unique individuals, defenders of individual rights and freedoms, credible, trusted, grounded in reality. Maverick News, Maverick News. Defending free speech, free speech. Donate. at freedomreporters.com. Do it now. Tomorrow may be too late. Maverick News. The world is watching.
Can you comment on the rules of engagement when it, as it relates to targeting the actual leaders of other nations, with Netanyahu talking about taking out the Ayatollah?
So, I mean, anything in the command structure is a legitimate target, including the leaders of a nation when you're at war. If you're not at war, that's a separate question. You don't want to go around assassinating the leaders of other nations if you're not actually at war with them. And that's one of the debates inside the United States right now. Does Trump have the authority to bring us into a war against Iran for no apparent immediate reason, you know? Yeah, they're a target. Zelensky's a target. And more than once, Zelensky says, you know where I work. Yeah, I work in the government building. I'm standing right by it. And they'd been raining cruise missiles and drones all through Kiev. And yeah, he's like, come after me. Don't go after them. But yeah. So yeah, is the leader of a country during wartime a legit target? Yes.
Okay. Just wanted to clear that up because I've heard many conflicting things regarding that. And then you sent me this other thing, which maybe you might want to comment on. The what China has been saying. Because you haven't really spoken at all about China and its role in all of this. And I guess as the United States kind of pulls back and creates a bit of a power vacuum in the world, China is responding like this.
Well, this is I can't read it that small.
Yeah, this is President Xi Jinping commentary is the site. Is this actually his account?
As far as I could tell. Did I email that to you?
Yeah, you did. Yeah.
So let me go in my sent items, and
I believe you did. Yeah. So I'll read it here. It says, the world can move on without the United States. 100 years ago, the British Empire dominated global commerce, commanding more than 20% of the world's wealth. Many believed its sun would never set. 200 years ago, France bestrode Europe's stage. Its armies feared, its culture envied. Napoleon declared himself immortal. 400 years ago, the Spanish crown reigned from Manila to Mexico, its treasure fleets groaning with silver and silk. The kings thought their glory would last eternal. Each empire proclaimed itself indispensable. Each was ultimately eclipsed. Power wanes, influence migrates, and legitimacy dies the moment it's assumed rather than earned. Should America forfeit the world's respect, it will discover what every fallen empire learned too late. The world moves on, always.
Yeah, and this isn't the first time the United States has dealt with an isolationist movement. And I mentioned the 30s as one example. But this is really the first time that we've dealt with a strong one since the American nation became the dominant nation on the planet, which was during and after World War II, where we finished that war and just nobody could touch us, and it's been that way ever since. One of the things that the isolationist folks, I understand you're tired of war, but it's a lot more than that when you decide to pull back, because the United States can dictate financial and humanitarian rules. We can keep rule of law and various things going. Do we always wear the white hat? No, but I mean, who would you rather have in charge, kind of a thing. So the Americans are very used to that, very used to, yeah, we're America, we get our way, but if you pull back, somebody else is going to step into that. We've been seeing a little bit of this in Africa. China's been outspending us in Africa for a decade or more, making some serious headway. We've talked about was it that road thing that I can't remember the actual name of it, where China's been investing in roads worldwide.
The Belt and Road. Yeah.
Yes. And that's been huge in Africa and other places. So they've been working on becoming, if not the dominant power, at least somebody that contends with the United States. And they've been doing a pretty good job of it. But the only way that they're going to get there is if we give it up. So there's a real danger where at some point, you're going to have the choice. Do you want the United States running it, or do you want China running it? And I think there's a pretty stark difference there.
Yeah, well, it seems to me that as Trump has embarked on this journey of contraction, both economically and militarily around the world, he's already creating a power vacuum.
Yeah.
And I think we're beginning to see the result of that.
People don't look to Trump right now, not like they look to Biden or Obama or Bush or Clinton or Bush or Reagan, or, everybody going back.
Yes. And so this is creating instability. He is, as much as he's saying he wants to be the president of peace and he's not going to intervene, and it's peace through strength. I think, Mike, and you tell me if I'm off track, but these policies and this approach is really signaling weakness, because it's saying we don't want to be involved. We're not going to get involved, which just tells all these other authoritarian governments around the world, do what you want. It's out of our hands. We're not going to interfere.
Yeah, it's giving up American leadership. The only benefit that I've been seeing is other people are at least starting to step up in Europe, to a lesser extent Canada. But there's the only way that Europe would fill that vacuum is if they figured out how to be united. There would have to be a Europe-wide military. There would have to be a coherent European government. Something like the American Republic, where we have 50 states and one government. So I don't see any replacement on the horizon for the United States, even if other people are starting to scramble for it.
Because as the U.S. pulls back, it's fracturing NATO.
And the only economy that is up to that is China, at least the only coherent economy. If you add up the European Union, then it's a contender, but they don't have the political competency in a Europe-wide coalition. They can't coordinate well enough yet, versus like a strong federal government like the United States, or a totalitarian regime like China.
And the words that I keep hearing in my head are the words of Rush Limbaugh, who would always talk about what we were going through when he was still with us was managed decline, which he was very critical of. And that's what I see with Trump. Mm-hmm. As much as he's sort of selling it the other way, he's taking America into, I don't even know if it's managed. It seems to be very mismanaged or intentional decline.
Falling down the stairs. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm highly critical of Rush Limbaugh, but because I saw the United States starting to rebuild in 2014, and it looked actually pretty good. And to be fair to him, in the post-Cold War with the peace dividend and all the drawdown, the military got cut in more than half. The military by 2001 was maybe a third of what it was in 1990. It is like huge cuts. But the 90s, like I said, they were full of peace and hope, and we were trying to build a better world, and we didn't necessarily need that military anymore. But then Obama in 2014 is like, we kind of need a military. So I mentioned the B-2 stealth bomber. We're getting the B-21. We have 10 of those building or already flying. So Obama did a lot, and I can't quite remember when Rush died, but I don't think he saw the rebuild. But then again, I don't know how much damage Trump's going to do.
In just a matter of months, he's done immense damage, I would say, to the economy, to the military, to U.S. reputation, to just relationships around the world.
Yeah.
It seems like he picks on friends and treats enemies like allies.
He's always
bizarre.
had a thing for Putin and Russia. So
Yeah. It's very, well, it's dangerous and it is destabilizing the entire world.
And I'm not positive he actually understands what military strength actually is, because he wanted his big, beautiful parade, but it's because he had seen other nations do it. And that's not what the United States does. Yeah. Having been in uniform for 22 years, I know that if you're in the United States military and you have a job, it's a serious job. There's a lot of training. There's a lot of competence. Your plate is full every single day. You don't have time for monkey garbage, trash, whatever you want to call it, about, marching up and down the field, kind of crap that North Korea puts on with people all that waving their legs. And it's this big old pageant that pretends that it's military.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you have people that are spending their time practicing that pageant, they are not practicing to be warfighters. So one of the best units that I saw marching down his parade was this group of Army folks that just looked like they did not want to be there. They had 10 million things that were better use of their time. They weren't in step. I'm like, you go, guys.
That's what I said too. It was like, it's not really a reflection on the military personnel in the parade. It's just because that's not what the U.S. is about.
Well, and the last so formation marching used to actually be a tactical skill. This was, swords and pikes and early firearms. Like in the United States in our Revolutionary War with the Minutemen and all that kind of stuff, they line up and they do the formation things where they got shooters, they got loaders, and then they've got people that are almost ready to fire, that kind of thing where they had the step thing. It was a very formation thing. And once you had firearms that could shoot straight, much less firearms that you could just keep shooting, that kind of stuff went away. So the American Civil War was the last time that you saw troops in formation marching in step. And that was 150 years ago? 1865, do the math in your head, was the last time that the United States military used that. So all of these people, they probably marched in basic training. And they might march every third year in a change of command ceremony for like an hour. But that's it. That's all they do. It's just like, so yeah, you saw Trump getting bored. You saw Marco Rubio yawn. There's rumors that Trump's a little angry at his Secretary of Defense Hegseth about the lackluster parade. And he doesn't actually understand that a military that parades like that, but then fights wars, is what you want.
Yeah. And, the other thing, I didn't really intend to talk about the big, beautiful parade tonight, but since we're talking about it, I didn't expect the sponsors. But then as soon as I looked at it, it was like, well, who is sponsoring it? It was like MMA. And, it was like so Trumpian, right?
Yeah, Coinbase, things like that.
Yeah. It was so commercialized, so
not military is what it was.
Yes, that's exactly right. It's so flea market.
Yeah.
That's
second-rate carnival barker. Yeah.
Yeah. But although there were elements of it that I thought were, kind of polished, and they had some, I think, antique military vehicles that were rolling
Yep.
through the parade, and
there
they
were
had,
there's some ceremonial units. The Army has the Old Guard, which is a Revolutionary War display team, fife and drum, that kind of stuff. It's every military has heritage units like that. But yeah, those were few and far between.
Yeah. So as a veteran, how do you feel about that kind of display?
Waste of time, waste of money. So yeah, it was, like I said, everybody, when they show up to work in the United States military, has a full plate. Their day is full. Whenever they get there and to whenever they leave, they've got something to do, something vital, something important. And if they don't, then their supervisor's really screwed up. But yeah, any minute that these units took away from doing their job to do this ridiculous parade was waste. It was complete waste. So when in the military you deal with money, yes, so the cost of the parade was one thing, but you also talk about man hours, because all the money in the world isn't going to do anything if you don't have people to actually do the work. And so you measure the cost in the military, both in money and in man hours. So however many thousands of people, they were there for like 3 days. So you got 72 hours times thousands of people. That's a lot of man hours that are just gone. You can't get those back. That's work that never got done.
And do you think that it did anything for like recruiting or even to
No.
It seemed to almost backfire, because you had these massive protests that erupted in hundreds, if not thousands, of cities across the country, around the world even.
So in the post-Vietnam era, the United States built an all-volunteer military. And one of the strengths of that is that it was a profession of honor and skill and competence. And that's what attracted people. And there was no, crass politics and things like that. That wasn't there. What the biggest harm, I think, aside from just all the time and money that was wasted, is that this looked like a crass political stunt. It looked like Trump wanted a birthday present. And that makes the military look like a toy, a partisan toy. So you have a whole bunch of people that might not join because they're like, I'd have to deal with Trump, I'm going into Trump's army. I'm not going into the United States Army. And that's a problem. It'll either make the army weaker or it'll make it more partisan. And both of those are recipes for disaster.
Yeah. And just to pivot back to Ukraine, it missed opportunity for Zelensky, because Trump had left the G7 conference in Canada early. He wanted to meet with Trump. What do you think was on the agenda there?
Well, probably more of what he talked about when they had their meeting in the Vatican, which was a real win. But also just to counter what Putin is whispering in Trump's ear, because they had an hour-long conversation, Putin and Trump. And Zelensky has to work to counter that, because obviously Trump isn't going to just call up Zelensky. So any opportunity he has for that, I'm sure that's probably 90% of why he went to the G7 meeting, was to have a sit down an hour with Trump. The other leaders are important. I'm glad he got something out of Canada. Hopefully people like Japan and France and the rest continue to help. But he really needed that hour with Trump, and he didn't get it.
Yeah. And we're seeing that even though Trump's and Vance say that Zelensky has no cards, apparently he wanted to talk to him about purchasing weapons.
Yeah.
So that the script is being flipped by Zelensky on Trump in that regard. Why the change in tactic or approach, do you think?
Well, you got to do what works. So if what works with Trump is offering to buy the weapons, the point is getting the weapons in the field to, drive back the Russians and save civilians. So whatever Zelensky does to get to that point is what he's going to have to do. And so if Trump's going to respond better to, hey, we're willing to buy the weapons, that's what Zelensky's going to do.
Yeah. And then we're, hearing that these prisoner exchanges and the return of bodies is happening or whatever. But
Yeah.
I'm hearing horrific stories.
Russia's
about,
been making propaganda hay out of that too. Just all sorts of muck surrounding it. What should have been, something that led somewhere else, Russia managed to sour and foul up. There's reports of Russian dead bodies being sent to Ukraine. We're seeing some prisoners that go all the way back to February, March, April, Mariupol prisoners that are just showing that being a POW in Russia is more like a slow execution than anything else. They're mere skeletons compared to what they were.
Yeah, I'm seeing photos and videos of soldiers coming home and they're emaciated.
Yep. So there's that. Russia had the crass offer to trade kidnapped Ukrainian children for Russian POWs, which is not legal. Ukraine can't accept that. I might still be tempted to do it, but it's just Russia just being awful still.
Yeah. Holding children as hostages.
Ransom for soldiers.
Yeah.
What you're doing is you're treating a protected class. Under international laws of war, I didn't mean to go here, but under the international laws of war, you have protected classes, and children are like the most protected of the protected classes. That's the most heinous crime. And treating Russia in their crass attempt to trade these was trying to equate kidnapped children with prisoners of war. And that's a no bueno. That's not going to work at all.
The thing about that, though, is as Russia has made statements about this, they're actually now acknowledging what they did, which is that they kidnapped these children.
That is another angle to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Which they've been denying all along. But now through this, it's actually an admission.
But there's no national outcry. How many people actually knew that Russia offered to trade kidnapped children for Russian POWs?
Yeah.
I mean, did that break any news at all? So,
nope.
Yeah.
Nope. I don't understand. I don't understand it. And that's because that shows that Ukraine, the West, were losing the information war. And as we're losing the information war, what has Trump done? Through DOGE, they've cut funding for the information programs and the soft power around the world. So, Voice of America and these kinds of outlets, right?
There was the FBI program that was going after Russian disinformation networks inside the United States. That's literally one of the FBI's core missions is counterespionage inside of the United States. That's one of the reasons they exist. Trump shut that down.
It's leaving the country
boggled my mind.
Very vulnerable, especially now because the information war, I think, has become, in many respects, the front line. The United States, Canada, under attack right now.
And we have been.
Yeah.
But the difference is that we used to be fighting back harder.
Yeah.
But I mean, at the same time, it just falls on people to keep up the fight. Because
yeah. Well, Mike,
what's your other choice?
Yeah, that's what you're doing in coming on here is just trying to spread some real information, some truth in the face of massive waves of propaganda and disinformation, misinformation, whatever you want to call it. It's the information war.
Yes.
The info war.
And I mean, I try, but I'm just one person. If you'll allow me to correct one of my possible mistakes, this is still one of those up in the air things. I talked to some people. I don't know if you knew this, but I'm going back to school for engineering. So I talked to some of my engineering folks that know bridges better than I do. And they were talking about how uncertain the damage to that Kirch Bridge actually was, that they don't know how much of the supports actually got hit. That the redundancy in that system might have been sufficient enough that that explosion, the bridge might actually be okay. So that would be one possible mistake that I made last time I was on here. Just so you know, I do actually continue my research and look into things. I'm like, what is the actual truth? I wanted to bring that up as one example of how people should not assume that what they think they know is actually the truth, that they should actually keep digging. They should go for expert sources and things like that.
Yeah. Well, I think that we've kind of covered most of the bases here tonight. Is there anything else you'd like to explore or think that we might be missing?
I did send you, I don't know if you were interested in showing that video. So one of my friends, he's a frontline soldier. He has been now for about 14 months. And his barracks was hit by a Russian missile and he was caught underneath the rubble. Okay. He's been recovering in the hospital. But this was during the broadcast. I sent you this email with the video.
Okay, I see it here. I can
download
it.
So I would like to. I've been thinking a lot about the damage Trump does inside the United States and the fact that he has ties to Joseph McCarthy. For those, I don't know how many people know that era of American history, because one of Donald Trump's mentors was Roy Cohn, who was the collaborator with Joseph McCarthy back in the day. But one of the things that was used, this is very famous from Edward R. Murrow. We will not walk in fear one of another. We will not be driven by fear into an age of unreason. If we dig deep in our history and our doctrine and remember that we are not descended from fearful men, not from men who feared to write, to speak, to associate, and to defend causes that were, for the moment, unpopular. So it's just, I was going back and thinking about, even in the face of all of this kind of stuff, we need to remember who we are. And we need to remember our values. We need to remember how important freedom is.
Did you want me to run this video?
Yeah, this is, this is in the shelter underneath the hospital. These are the wounded that are mobile enough to actually get down there. Okay. It's an old, I'd like to say it's an Italian song, but it's just one of those things that a building fell on this guy just, a week ago, and there's all these wounded around him, and they're managing to find a little bit of joy just in the middle of all of that. So that's what this is.
Passasci campagnana patuledo come due peppette fa guarda tu fa l'americano americano americano sientemi che t'ho fa tu vuoi vivere la moda ma se vive whisky soda poi ti senti disturbato tu abballo rock and roll tu gioca baseball ma soldi per camel, chi te li dà la borsetta di mamma, tu fa l'americano, americano, americano. Ma sei nato in Italia, sentimi, non c'è sta niente, fa ok napolitano, tu fa l'americano, come ti può capire chi va bene, se tu le parli mezzo americano. Quando si fa l'amore sotto la luna, come va a parati I love you. Tu fa l'americano, americano, americano, sientimi che t'ho fa. Tu vuoi vivere la moda, ma se vive whisky soda, poi ti senti disturbato. Tu abballo rock and roll, tu gioca baseball, ma soldi per camel, chi te li dà la borsetta di mamma, tu fa americano, americano. Ma il Senato Italia, sentimi, non c'è sta niente perché napolitano, tu fa l'americano, tu fa l'americano. Va bene, l'orchestra.
Давай ще давай.
Just so you know, he couldn't use his legs or hands last week. So he's recovering.
A little bit of joy, even in the face of tragedy.
Yeah, a little bit of a reminder that even little things help.
Yeah.
Even if you think, that's not going to help. Yes, every little bit helps.
All right. Well, Mike, I think that brings us to the end of tonight's broadcast. Again, anything you'd like to add or a final thought tonight?
No, we're at a tense moment. Things have been changing quickly.
Yeah.
And we'll see how this goes. I really hope things don't go sideways in a bad way, but they still could.
We'll see what tomorrow brings. Mike McCarrick, thank you, sir. And folks, I will be back tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Eastern, on the flip side.
We watched the old wall crumble, we heard that freedom's call, but now it's rising higher under Putin's shadowed thrall. From Ukraine's fields to Moscow's streets, a cold divide begins to creep. A world of fear where truth is bent and promises are sold too cheap. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. All in all, we're calling Putin's fall. We don't need their blind instruction, we've seen the lies unfold. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. He speaks of glory of days long past, where all would kneel before his cast. With tanks and threats he stakes his claim, while silencing those who dare to blame. Propaganda clouds the mind, we don't need no education blind to the bloodshed and the strife, where Putin's dreams cut deep like knives. Can't you hear the children cry? Can't you see the tanks roll by? In Putin's world where truth is broken, we're just pawns in the lies unspoken. A wall of fear, a wall of light, where freedom fades into the night. We stand upon the edge once more as Cold War ghosts return to life. They tell us not to question, to walk in shadowed lines. But we've seen the fall, we've felt the cold, we know the weight of all their crimes. Ukraine's cries, a world denied, a broken bridge that's left behind. In Putin's quest for power's throne, they're building walls we can't condone. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. All in all, we're trapped within his fall. We don't need their false direction, we see through the stories they've sold. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. So if we rise, if we resist, we break the walls they built like fists. For in our hearts where hope is strong, there's strength to fight against the wrong. But if we fall, if we concede, remember what the future needs. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. So if we rise, if we resist, we break the walls they've built like fists. For in our hearts where hope is strong, there's strength to fight against the wrong. But if we fall, if we concede, remember what the future needs. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall.
This has been a Maverick Multimedia production.